Welcome to the Chief Endurance Officer Podcast. I'm your host, Greg McDonough. Each week, we hear real-time stories from athletes and CEOs on how to maximize performance through an endurance mindset. Let's get started. Welcome to the Chief Endurance Officer Podcast. I'm your host, Greg McDonough. I am super excited about our guest today, as my endurance journey started with open water swimming, but not like this guy. He has swum Robben Island to the mainland, Cape Town, 135 times, including this morning. He's also swum the English Channel. Him and his team have swum the ice mile in Antarctica. A magnificent storyteller, public speaker, 3-time Guinness World Record holder, the author of Push Past Impossible. Please welcome Ryan Stramrood. Ryan, it's great to have you on the show.
Greg, thank you so much. Awesome to be here.
It's we love talking about endurance and the endurance mindset. And my question for you is, Ryan, tell me how your endurance mindset has impacted your life unexpectedly.
Quite unexpectedly, to be honest, because I'm not lying if I tell you until the age of 29, 30, I didn't really know I had an endurance mindset. I think I probably had a couple of the traits that you could, in retrospect, you can look back. I was quite a stubborn kid into adulthood, and but never really applied myself. And then got involved in swimming and started taking on some fairly serious swims that required quite a lot of endurance and a lot of other stuff as well. And realized that actually I might just have something. A lot of what came naturally to me, other guys were falling out, long before, and I would just carry on and wonder where they're going and what's wrong. And I realized I've got a little something that I want to explore a bit more. And that decision to explore a bit more has taken me on a really, really fascinating journey. So it's impacted my life quite profoundly. In fact, it's required, or not required, it's induced a complete change of direction, and a very positive one too.
Could you dive in a little bit deeper into that complete change of direction? Like, where were you prior to taking on these endeavors, and talk to us about that transition, that change?
Yeah, of course. I'll give you a little bit of the background, because that will shed the light. I'm a salesman by trade. I've been the last 25 years running a small advertising sales operation in Cape Town. And eventually I got a little bit, I was starting to get frustrated because I was getting fat and lazy on the couch at the age of 29, going on 30. And I took a client away on an incentive weekend, and we were sitting on our patio having a beer. And I was saying, I need to do something, the fat's starting to pile on. Of course, the client said, why don't you join my little swimming squad that I do back in Cape Town? And of course, being a client, I nodded and said, yes, good idea. And then come Monday morning, regretted it, but thought I can't now let him down. I'm not that guy who says yes and then doesn't pitch. So I went along and, jumped in the lane. I don't know if any of your listeners know how a swimming squad works, but usually it's divided into 6 or 8 lanes. And those lanes have different speeds and different skill sets in them. I knew none of this, of course, at the time. And merrily was asked by the coach, where would you place yourself? And I just jumped in a lane, which happened to be the fastest lane. And that was a big mistake because, the first 4 or 5 lengths, anyone can swim at full tilt. And to keep up with the other guys in the lane, I did. And then all of a sudden, I think on my sort of 4th tumble turn, I realized that I'm in deep trouble. And, things went pear from there. I managed about 20 lengths. But it started a journey for me, and I met a few people that were quite cool guys. And biggest part of what I'm telling you now, first time in my life, I actually stuck with it. I went back the next day or the next session, and I did it again, and I did it again. And eventually you start to build a little bit of fitness. And then in my lane was a guy who had swum Robben Island. Now, for your listeners, you might recognize the name. That's where Nelson Mandela spent 17 of his 27 years incarcerated. It's about 7.5 kilometers, about 4.1 miles from the island to the beach. But it is very cold water that surrounds it, and also quite scary water that surrounds it. So to do that swim back in those days was a very big thing. So to meet someone in my presence swimming in the same lane as me, who had actually done it, was fascinating to me. It really was. It was someone I put up on a pedestal. And also at the time, my belief was, he's one of those superhuman athletic types, not me. I'm just a lowly salesman trying to get fit in a swimming pool. And of course, you can see where this might be going. I stuck with it, and the guys challenged me to perhaps give it a go. And for the very first time in my life, I set a sporting goal, and I started to train towards it. And my family and all my friends were saying, "Oh, don't be daft. That's not you. That's not for you." And I kind of believed them, but I stuck with it. And eventually, long story short, got it done and found my feet 2.5 hours later on the beach, frozen stiff. And also, just for clarity, we only use a Speedo, goggles, and cap, silicone cap. There's no wetsuit, no grease or anything. So there's if you want to be recognized for doing it, you've got to do it the purest way. And that cold sets inside you quite hectically, and it becomes extremely hard to perform. And that, takes puts strain on the body, but the mission is no longer a physical one. The mission becomes a mental one, because that cold is impacting your mind quite profoundly. And on my very first Robben Island swim, when I walked out on that beach successful, it certainly was a lesson for me, because I thought that was impossible for me only a few months earlier. Yet here I was walking out on the beach, and it's, triggered something in my brain to say, okay, well, you know what, if that was impossible a few months ago, and now I've just done it, what else is there? And so the journey began for me. But most important part, and jump in anytime here, Greg, otherwise I'm just going to ramble on.
No, you're doing great. Love it.
Most important part is the story is cold water. Because what I realized quite quickly, living in Cape Town and being immersed in, every time I get in the ocean around here, it's pretty darn cold. I started to realize very quickly that us humans have not evolved well to handle the cold. It has a profound impact on the body and on the mind. We have, however, evolved very well to avoid it. So when we do throw ourselves in, our mind and our body are equipped with very powerful defense mechanisms to make sure we get out. Okay. And what happens, your listeners will relate to this, I'm sure. People walk into icy cold water, pain sets in, it is absolutely horrific, and you can't think of anything else other than to get out. You turn around and you get out. And that is what I didn't know at the time, but what I've discovered through repeat immersions, and where it's, we'll talk about a bit later in the journey, that I started to realize is an extremely powerful defense mechanism, but it's also an extremely overzealous defense mechanism. Okay. So what is actually happening as you get cold? The mind is implementing pain, panic, and fear, and they come together in a split second, and they accentuate self-doubt. You doubt yourself, you doubt your abilities. You are, depending on the degree of cold, but you're often denied the ability of rational thought. You can't calm yourself and go, well, okay, I'm in this situation. Can I still do another 2, 3, 4, 12 hours ahead in this cold temperature? It's a thought that just doesn't compute, because your mind doesn't allow it to compute. All it wants you to do is to get out. And that makes sense if you think about, you're in a hostile environment, without a doubt. It will kill you. Either you're going to warm the ocean up to your core temperature, or it's going to cool you down at some point. So there is an outcome. Okay. So, and I think intuitively, subconsciously, we know this very well. We evolved to know this. But where it tells you the end point is for you is not where the end point is. Okay, and that is probably the crux of what I discovered. I started to realize, so you mentioned, let's talk about Robben Island. I did my 135th Robben Island crossing this morning. So it went from that, wow, looking at that guy up in the pedestal, to me doing it, being the guy who's done it the most in the entire world, up until quite recently anyway. 135 times. Now, on pretty much every single one of those 135 Robben Island crossings, at some point, I am trying to find a reason to get out. I want to get in the support boat alongside me, which let's call it the comfort zone, because that's where I'll get a nice blanket and dry myself and wrap and get back in my clothes. Yeah. Excuse me. All I can think of is, how do I get out? Not how do I make it to the beach, which I know I've done how many times. I know I can make it to the beach. I know without any doubt, but I can't think it. It's hard at first. And I started to think about this when I got out the water. Like, why do I get so negative? Why do I look for reasons why I can get out, not for reasons why I can extend my time in that environment and push a little bit harder? And it started to dawn on me that it's the defense mechanisms that we're talking about. Now, I'm no psychologist, so there's nothing kind of learned that from a book that I'm telling you. This is all from my personal experience. So there are psychologists listening, although it's been tried and tested many times. So challenge me. I just started to realize how overzealous it is. It's a defense mechanism that wants me out to keep me safe. And while this is happening in my head, my body's implementing a whole barrage of its own defense mechanisms, and the blood is rushing from all your extremities to your center core, because you can live without arms and legs for a while, forever maybe, but you can't live very long without a heart pumping blood to the brain. So all that blood leaves your muscles, and your muscles become uncoordinated, and you've got no more power because they've got no more oxygen feeding them to power them up. And you get slower and slower, which keeps you in the cold longer and longer, and it becomes a chain reaction. And your mind kind of knows this, so it worked really hard to get you out. I know I'm repeating myself, but that is what I discovered, and that is what I started to challenge. And obviously, the colder the water, the more profound that effect is. So myself and a couple of like-minded mates started pushing ourselves at different levels of cold, slowly but surely, getting ourselves really, really fit, understanding what's happening, figuring out the best ways to recover from it, and then taking on more and more difficult challenges all the way up to Antarctica, as you mentioned.
Wow.
Let me pause there.
Super curious. Does that flight or fight feeling come in at different times? So like, you've done this crossing 135 times, you've done all these other magnificent swims.
Yeah.
Once you jump in, are you anticipating this defense mechanism to kick in, and you don't know when it's going to kick in? Like, walk us through sort of the anticipation of it happening, the tackling of the feeling, and then when do you actually break through? Do you break through when your feet hit the sand on the beach, or do you broke through 10 minutes later after you've had this, defense mechanism kick in?
Good question. It's fairly routine for me, and obviously I'm talking for myself. Problem is, not many people have figured this out. So this morning's Robben Island, there were two first-time swimmers as well doing it. They were wearing wetsuits as well, so it's not really the same thing. But I was trying to explain to them that what happens when you get in the cold, and anyone who's had a swim in cold water before will know this. You get in, there's excruciating pain, you usually get out. If you fight through that pain and you stay in, everything gets really nice. You start to feel good, everything's a little euphoric, you feel great, you think, I've got this, I can stay in this forever. Then what happens is that cold starts to settle in your core, just starts to penetrate the core. All of a sudden that triggers, in my opinion, triggers all those defense mechanisms. So to answer your question, again, let's just use the Robben Island, because it's a nice confined 7.5 kilometers, 4.1 miles. Usually you get in, it's really cold. The first 10 minutes, you're battling through all that pain and all those things that are happening. You fight through that, and then slowly but surely things get great again. You get, probably for me, I get about an hour in, and then all of a sudden that cold starts to set in. And that's where I need to, what I call, flick a switch or change gear. But there's no longer now just physical fitness stuff. It is now mental stuff fighting my body that is starting to shut down, and my head that is trying to tell me it's time to get out straight away. And that is actually the real challenge, as I explained to these poor people who had the misfortune of being in a boat out to the island this morning. They're wearing wetsuits. They always get a mouthful from me, because, and I do it very politely. I'm not arrogant about it, and I encourage everyone to swim however way you want, but don't go do the Robben Island swim and then in a wetsuit and tell people you've done the Robben Island swim. Tell them you've done the Robben Island swim in a wetsuit, because the challenge of that swim and any cold water swim is not the distance. Anyone who is swimming savvy and committed can get themselves fit enough to do that. The fitness part is actually easy. You just need a little bit of discipline, and you need to know what kind of training to do, and you need to get it done. The challenge of that swim and every cold swim is the cold. It's the mental part of it. And if you put on a wetsuit, it eliminates 90% of that cold. And you're just doing a distance swim. Good for you. But don't compare yourself to someone who does it in a Speedo.
So Ryan, as you're telling those stories, it reminded me of two what I thought were relatively cold swims that I've done. One was the Escape from Alcatraz triathlon, and then the
Yeah.
Indiana Ironman. And granted, I was in a full wetsuit and even a little cap for the Escape from Alcatraz. And when you jump into that water, it just feels like knives are stuck into you. Your wetsuit
Yeah.
feels like it kind of compresses, and you get really short of
Yeah.
breath. And so, but eventually, to your point, you get through it, right? You get one stroke after another, and you start warming up, and your feet start tingling a little bit. But you made a great point around the mental aspect of it. And so my question is, um, what is do you have a mantra? Do you have a saying? Do you have a sort of something that you kind of go through mentally as you know this is happening that you can walk us through?
Yeah. I can't give you step 1, 2, or 3. And I think everyone needs to kind of figure it out themselves if that's their thing. But I definitely do things to get through it. So firstly, I'm blessed to now have many, many years of and many miles of experience. So I kind of know what I'm going to feel like. And I literally have a talk to myself before I get in. So even as routine as it is for me, I still have a little chat to myself saying, right, the next 2.5 hours of your life are going to be like this. And I have a conversation with myself as to what I'm going to do when that cold kicks in. Okay. Because what I also say to a lot of first time swimmers, so any cold swim, is that your swim only starts the first time you think you want to get out. Okay. So the first part is as far as I'm concerned, is easy. You can get through the 10 minutes of pain because you've done the training and you're tough. You can swim through the 45 minutes, an hour of while your core temperature is able to maintain. And then when that core temperature starts dropping or that cold starts creeping in, you are going to think, I'm still so far from the beach. There's no way I can go. I'm on a downward slant. That is when your swim starts. Okay. And it's all a mental game. If you allow yourself to go negative and to fear it and to focus on the cold and how terrible you feel, you're going to really battle. You're probably not going to make it. If you tell yourself, it's coming. So when it arrives, I always go, right, here it is. And I put on a happy smile under the water just to convince myself that this is what I do. I'm a cold water swimmer and I'm getting cold. So stop. This is what you've trained for. This is where you need to be tough because this is the real part of the journey today in whatever I'm doing. So it doesn't come close to a mantra. It is probably just a mental exercise to make sure I stay positive. When I swam the English Channel, now that's a cold water swim and I was in for 13 hours. That's a whole different ball game. But it was the same exercise that I did and that I've carried through all my swims. And that is to stay positive, to find humor. Because cold, tired, stung, chafed, exhausted swimmer can be an exceptionally grumpy beast. Okay. And that is, especially if you don't get your nutrition right, and that spirals at a rate of knots, trust me. Especially for me. So speaking for myself, I absolutely try and make sure I stay positive. So for example, and this sounds so silly, but in the moment, it's so important. I'll be swimming the English Channel. I'm absolutely broken. I'm freezing cold. The wind is howling. So the waves are going up and down. I take a breath and a wave comes and I take a gulp of seawater, which hurts my throat because it's happened so many times before. It is terrible. It is so easy to then throw your hands in the air and go, stuff this, I'm out. And that's the natural reaction, except I go, wasn't that awesome? I wonder how many of those you can handle. Are you tough? Or are you going to let that impact your head? No, you're not. Have a laugh. And I actually laugh under the water. The second is if they could hear it, would probably know what's happening. And even though it is still terrible and I feel all the terrible things, it's just feeds a little bit of positivity into my brain. And I've got lots of little tricks like that I try and employ, which work really well, but not always.
So I need to ask you a technical question. You mentioned nutrition. How do you handle nutrition? Is that on the support boats? Is that on your body? I guess you can't be because you're just wearing a Speedo cap and goggles. So talk to us about the nutrition strategy while you're in those swims.
Yeah, so again, just a little bit of insight into how it works. If you want to do a swim, you want to do it the purest way, it's speedo, goggles, and cap. The English Channel, for example, will allow you to grease yourself. You will always have a support boat alongside you. You may not, however, touch that boat at all. If you put a hand along it and hang on it, or they give you any help at any way at all that gives you any kind of propulsion or rest or anything like that, you are instantly disqualified. So you do have support because things go wrong exceptionally quickly out there in the ocean, out of your control. But obviously, especially on a 13-hour sort of English Channel kind of swim, you need to feed, you need to hydrate. A lot of people think, oh, you're in the water, so why would you need to drink? It's just a funny perception that humans have. But swimming is quite a tough sport. So you are perspiring under that water, even though it's cold. You are working. So usually on every half an hour or every 45 minutes, whatever you decide, they'll throw you a bottle of whatever you've asked for, and you drink it and you throw it back, or they pull it in on a rope. In terms of what you drink, something like a channel, you kind of know, it's fairly well known that at a point you're going to run out of the carbs that you've stored. Okay, so you carb load the night before, and whether that's right or wrong, all this banting talk, and that, there's been lots of discussions, but, I'm a big believer in the placebo effect as well. So we'll get to that. But at some point in an English Channel, you're going to reach a point where the body is empty and essentially you're hitting the wall, and you'll be eating all the way through. So I drink obviously a carb drink. I drink electrolytes, but you'll be very careful because you're swallowing a lot of salt water, which is an electrolyte as itself in its own. So you can't overdo that. But on a very long swim, I also like to eat every now and then. So I'm throwing a little Tupperware, and then I've got to tread water like crazy while I hold the Tupperware. You try and be in the water with both arms are out, and I have a quick look. There might be a marshmallow and a few grapes. I shove it in. So my nutrition is very far from scientific. However, swimming doesn't always allow you to have what you want, to be honest, because it's very hard to eat. It's much more sensible to have shakes and things you can drink. So but I also, again, I'm kind of the mindset guy. So I put what I need in my body, and that's not very scientific. That's sort of off the shelf, extra carbs and electrolytes and whatever. But I make sure there's also something on the boat for those long hauls that I just like, that I look forward to. In the next 30 minutes, I'm going to get my piece of chocolate or my whatever, and you kind of use those as the little carrots. If I just make it to the next half hour, if you're thinking of pulling out or bailing, you set yourself those little carrots and you break it up. It's very important to break these endurance things up. And this could be a lesson again to listeners is, if you stand on the shores of Dover and you look across to France and your mindset is, I'm going to swim to France, you might find yourself in a bit of trouble. If your mindset is, I'm going to be stopped in 30 minutes, I'm just going to swim then, and then I'm getting a nice drink of something, and then I'm going to do it again and again and again. It's bite-sized chunks, and you've got to switch off to time. And this is what's fascinating to me as well about myself and how my head works. Doing a Robben Island like I did this morning, my headspace is all about swimming to that beach. I just want to get it done. 2 hours, it was 2:09 this morning, walk out, and I'm done, and I can get back to the office. That is not the mindset for the bigger swims. You cannot do that because it's an entirely wrong mindset. And the more this happened as I was progressing in my swimming career, the more I realized how the mindset you adopt going in is very, very important. And I'm not just talking about I'm going to do this mindset and a rah, beat my chest. I'm a strong human mindset, and I'm a fit human. I'm talking about how you break it up going into it, how you are going to incentivize, how you're going to stay positive. Have those mindset tools pre-prepared. It's very hard to figure it out when you're in the moment and you're having the pain you're feeling or the negative thoughts you're feeling, and you don't know how to process that. So it's a big help to actually think about that before. And sometimes, in a podcast like this, it sounds a little silly, these silly little tricks, but and maybe what works for me is completely wrong for someone else. But I also know a lot of my swimming mates also have their little things that spur them on. I'm also a funny animal. I can be swimming with somebody And I can be thinking, I'm not going to make this. I'm in absolute pain. This is freezing cold. I'm on a slippery slope and I'm trying to stay positive, but I'm really battling. I'm losing the battle. And then suddenly, and I'll also be thinking, but no, this person's going to make it. And, why am I feeling so terrible? And all of a sudden the person next to me will bail out and say, I can't go on. The amount of strength I take from that, I don't know why. It's always happened when suddenly you realize, hang on, clearly that guy was having more pain than me. And it's an amazing thing, because quite often my brain then flips and I'm fine for the rest of the swim. Whereas I was on a slippery slope, probably because subconsciously I'm comparing, and you don't want the humiliation of your buddy's going to make it and you're not, and you've done all the prep and blah. I don't know. I haven't quite worked that out why. But as soon as someone else shows more pain than me, I get strength, and I almost become the guy to say, no, don't worry, don't pull out. We've got this, and you flip your mindset to rather try and help or keep them in and show them strength. And when you're trying to even fake it, you convince yourself and off you go.
There's a lot to dig into that. It's interesting you mentioned breaking up these longer endurance races into bite-sized chunks. For me, for Ironman, it's 15 minutes. Like every 15 minutes, I'm taking in hydration, salt, food, you name it. And it becomes a series of very short little episodes. And then all of a sudden, after many, many hours, you're kind of there at the finish line. I'm curious, while you're on land training, are you meditating? Do you have like a practice that helps you sort of come up with these stay positive, like this mental, there has to be some mental training that goes on between your swims?
The answer is yes, but I want to caveat that because I'm a hacker. So I've never taken training swimming squat on that yet, but never taken any kind of mental training. Everything I've figured out myself. And someone asked me a few years ago, like, do you meditate as you are swimming now before you do these ultra cold swims, which we should talk about in a minute? And my answer was no, I've never meditated before. And then I went on to describe what I do. And she said, oh, well, that's meditation, a form of meditation. So I suppose, yes, maybe I do some form of meditation. But so should I jump ahead and just, I don't know if it's jumping ahead, it's all in context, but once I started doing these extra long cold swims, and then I started testing with a bunch of mates, colder and colder and colder, all the way up to water that we believe shouldn't have been humanly possible to actually swim an extended distance in. And that was, there are a number of stories I can tell you, but in fact, we'll circle back to one of them. But the Antarctica one I want to tell you now is, that's where I swam a full mile. That's 1,609 meters in my Speedo in -1 degree water. So that's 30 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's below where fresh water freezes and salt water freezes a little bit lower. And we went to Antarctica to try and be the first to swim an official mile south of the Antarctic Circle. And we didn't, just because of lots of stories, which you'll really enjoy if any of your audience read my book. We didn't get the geography right to that because we were on a passenger liner and the weather was too terrible. They turned around, but it made no difference to the temperature of the water and the size of the challenge. But before I walked down the gangway of an ocean liner in Antarctica in a Speedo, cap and goggles, and dived into -1 water, if you don't prepare yourself mentally and go into what I call the zone, because I think that's where that conversation came up. It's like, do you meditate? No, I go into a zone. They said, well, describe the zone. And my zone is just blocking as much out as I possibly can. You can still talk to me, but I'm not going to respond anymore. I'll take the info in if I need it. I'll filter everything else out. I focus on the impact. So I'm going to dive in this water. How am I going to manage that excruciating headache and sore teeth that I'm going to get? How am I going to manage that hyperventilation feeling as my body reacts and tries to get me out? How am I going to manage the adrenaline rush of diving into this water where there are orca and leopard seals and lots of other things? And, it's cold enough to kill you pretty quickly. How am I going to manage that adrenaline and not sprint the first 200 meters and then not have enough energy to still finish the 1,400 meters I've got to do after that. That all has to be, for me anyway, computed before I walk down that gangway. Don't try and figure it out lastminute.com. You need to think about it, and I need to visualize it, and I need to visualize my first few strokes. I need to visualize that pain, and I try and visualize it way worse than it's going to be and how my body is going to react. And I try and calm myself because I know I'm going to be in shock. There's nothing you can really do about it. The body will react the way the body reacts. It's just how you respond to it mentally and physically that is obviously in question. So, I can't tell you really what I do other than visualize it and think about it hard. So block everything out, find your quiet time, sit in a dark room, whatever you want to do, close your eyes and visualize, whatever's relevant to you. Not everyone's going to try and swim in Antarctica or Ice Mile, but visualize whatever you're doing. And try and familiarize yourself with the pain points of what you're doing. You know what they are coming up. If you're a distance runner, you know what's going to happen. You know that big hill's coming. You know what your mind's going to be telling you at that point before you start the ascent, or whatever the case may be. And visualize it and look forward to that point and make yourself positive about it and almost appreciate the pain that comes with it, and it will help you. It doesn't solve all your problems. You're still going to hurt. But that's the point of these challenges, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a great lessons in that, Ryan. Thank you. Shifting gears slightly, talk to us about how you've taken the principles and this mindset that you've learned through your endurance and applied it to your business.
Yeah, great. I know I'm so blessed. So I was an advertising salesperson. I now I'm a full-time inspirational speaker. So I spend more time in the States and Australia, and I'm off to Pakistan in 2 days. I never really know where I am. My body clock hasn't got a clue. And I'm telling you this because I'm spreading messages which mostly corporate organizations are paying plenty money to see and to hear because they're taking real value out of it. So I'm really blessed. And how do I apply swimming and all these mindset things? I've constructed a really cool story of my journey and what I've discovered inside my head about it, which we've already spoken about, where the mind says the endpoint is and where the real endpoint is. But it all revolves around the center focus of the comfort zone, which we kind of know. If you don't get outside your comfort zone, you cannot learn new stuff. It's as simple as that. Stay in your lane. You might deliver. There's a roof over your head. There's food on the table. You'll hit your number. Everyone might pat you on the back. They'll be happy with you. But you'll never find out what was on the other side of the line. So if you don't get outside your comfort zone, you cannot learn new stuff. If you stop learning new stuff, you cannot grow. And when we stop growing, one thing I can guarantee you is you're going to get overtaken by those who are. Be that in your personal life, in your sporting life, or in your business life. And that is a message that I help many thousands and thousands of people to understand, especially entrepreneurs and obviously, actually everyone from school kids actually all the way up to presidents of massive corporates. And we talk a lot about the awareness of how the mind is not propelling us forward when the going gets tough. It is often sending us in the opposite direction. So we've got this gateway to absolute greatness, this power tool that lives upstairs that no one's going to argue when I say it's the gateway to absolute greatness, because it really is. But I get a lot of pushback sometimes, or discussion at least, when I say this gateway to absolute greatness that we all have is actually our biggest limitation, because it's so powerful. But its primary job is not to propel you forward in a hostile, uncomfortable, scary situation. It's to keep you safe. And that happens subconsciously. And that impacts every single person's decision-making process if you're not aware of it. And that is what I relay quite nicely. It's all great for the survival of the human species to keep us safe. And I understand, so we don't run into a fire or walk off a cliff or something dumb like that. However, there's a side effect of this evolution of this wonderful defense mechanism we all have, or powerful brain we all have. And that is, it keeps us safe from the emotional pain that comes from failure. Because when we fail, there's consequence, there's humiliation, there's embarrassment, there's all those things. And sometimes there's pain that comes from that. So it keeps us safe from the emotional pain that comes from failure. And that is the strongest thing that is holding specifically people in corporates. And to answer laterally answering your question in my own business as well, it is the desire or the instinct to stay safe that is stemming growth. And lots of people grow, absolutely, and a lot of people have overcome this, but the vast majority don't realize there is a switch you can flick in your brain that takes you from the self-protect way of looking at red tape and targets and mountains and whatever the case may be, and puts you into what I say a self-explore. It's just a different way of looking at that exact same problem. So in my own very little business, I'm a small sole proprietor, a little team of salespeople. We were media salespeople. We would box to our weight. So a account would come out that, yes, we can handle that. Looks like a nice account. Pitch for it, try and win it. We were really good at what we did, so we would usually win it. I was petrified of not winning it. Then a big account would come up for pitch, and I would go, no, that's designed for the teams who've got 30, 40 strong sales team. We don't have the capacity. We're just going to look ridiculous trying to pitch for that. And after I started to develop this mindset and understand the stuff that I was, starting to process through all my swims, I would say to my team, no, we're going in balls to the wall after that one. And if we fail, we fail. You know what? But if we don't try, we've already failed. And all those cliches that are so darn true. And we need to remind ourselves of them. And I would go in and we would fight for them. And you know what? Most of the time we'd lose because we're too small and it was designed for bigger teams. But every now and then we'd win one and my business would just be an absolute hive and we'd be the talk of the industry. And how on earth did that little company win that? And that fueled me to do more and more. So, and that's just my own personal case, and again, on a side note, setting all of that aside, which was a brilliant living for me and a wonderful way to support my family in 25 years, to try and get on the inspirational speaking circuit, because I really believe in my story and my message, was a huge leap of faith for me. It really was. So, without trying to blow any smoke, it was scary as hell. And it's very hard to get on the inspirational speaking circuit, especially sitting in Cape Town trying to, do business in the States, which luckily I'm now getting really good traction because no one knows me. And why on earth would you fly me over and spend a lot of money to hear a story of someone you've never heard of? It's only when I get you to maybe do a little bit of Googling and certainly ask for some references that I start to pick up decent business. But it was very, very difficult and scary for me to do that. And I'm quite proud of myself for doing it. And then just as I started to gain traction, COVID hit, and how many events do you think were happening around the world in lockdown? Try zero. So there I sat now thinking, did I make a good decision? And I certainly didn't believe I did because no one knew where COVID was going and how long it would last. But here I am, extremely happy and on a phenomenal journey, talking to people like yourself, Greg. And, that's all thanks to exactly what I preached, practicing what I preach, I suppose.
I'd love to talk a little bit more about the public speaking journey. When did that light bulb go on for you that, hey, I've got a message and I want to deliver it to these audiences? And also walk us through sort of the training you need to go through. Like what's, and I personally have a lot of curiosity here, so that's why I'm asking the question. But that initial day when you said, yeah, this is something I want to do, walk us through kind of what happens between there and now.
Yeah. So I actually go into a bit of detail on this in my book as well, because I can't take a lot of credit for. In my sales business, I would go attend sales conferences, right? My sister, Jill Atwood, worked with me and for me at the time. And there would be an inspirational speaker up on stage quite often, at these conferences. And I'd be the one clapping and, wow, that was so great. And Jill would elbow me and saying, Ryan, what you just did there, trying to be the first to swim around the southernmost tip of South America, what you did trying to swim from America to Russia across the Bering Sea, what you've done in Antarctica is just way above what you've just clapped and stood up and having your goosebump moments. Put a story together and give it a try. And that's what sowed the seed, by the way. But and I'm very much no. I'm I've got a business to run. There's no time to now start putting stories together. And who wants to hear me tell a story about swimming? Anyway, I was convinced, and I did, and I've got some really cool footage and a wonderful story. And I went to that sales conference, a business called Sales Guru, a guy called Mark Keating, who's the CEO. And I said, I've been a delegate of yours for like 15 years, right? I also happen to be, I'm a salesperson and I do these extreme things. How about giving me a chance and let me be the inspirational speaker on the stage? Now, I can unpack how scary that was for me to do, but I put myself out there and he took the bait and he hired me to speak. And my first talk ever was in front of 550 people. And they strapped a little thing. I had no training whatsoever. Nothing. I had put a PowerPoint together with a couple of slides, and it ended in a really cool video, which I still use to this very day because it is proper kick-ass. And I gave my story with a bunch of nerves and shakes on stage, and 550 people stood up and applauded for me. And Mark said afterwards, that's in his 20 years of presentations, that's the first time he's had a full house standing ovation for any of his speakers. And that was obviously a proper trigger for me to go, oh, okay. And from that one gig that I did, luckily the room was filled with 550 people who also run businesses or involved in other organizations, and the booking started. So all of a sudden it went from, just a hobby and maybe a little bit of pocket money if someone was prepared to pay. And it eventually got to a point where you think, well, hang on, you can actually make a living out of this if you do it right. And as soon as you come to that, you then obviously got to figure out your business plan and, what's sustainable and, do I have to keep doing crazy things to the inch of my life to stay relevant? Or do I have a message that's strong enough from what I've already done that can really help people? Because you won't survive if you're just the guy who's got cool stories, because you're going to get old and you're not going to do cool stuff all the way. And it's exceptionally hard, to be honest, because everything I do as a swimmer, I do for myself. I've never had any interest in being a speaker before this or being in the newspapers or doing podcasts. I do it for myself because I'm pushing my own boundaries. So I don't have a camera person filming me doing stuff or someone documenting it. And clearly when you're swimming, you can't do that either. So 99% of the challenges that I've done, there's no documentation. It's just a story. However, in Antarctica, I was part of a passenger line and about 180 passengers filmed me so I could get all their footage, and that created the story. I sidetracked myself. Anyway, it's snowballed, Greg, and I still to this day have had no formal training. I have in COVID put myself through some courses just because what's happened with me is I've become a performance coach without even knowing it. After my keynotes, many people will contact me privately and ask, like, do you mind sparing me a couple of minutes? And I would chat to them and, and help them as best I can until someone pointed out, saying, Ryan, that's performance coaching. You're helping them to perform better. And, that I didn't know what I was doing. I was doing it maybe a little irresponsibly. So I did all the formalities around that and understand a bit better what I need to do. And yeah, where you asked me, so yeah, Greg, I don't know, what more can I tell you? No, I'm luckily survived COVID, figured out how to do things virtually, how to stay current. I've got other keynotes as well. I've fleshed it out. I was convinced by my sister to write this book, which has been absolutely incredible for me. Very vulnerable to write a book, by the way, about yourself.
Yeah, I can't wait to read it.
Yeah, I hope you enjoy it. A lot of people enjoy it. Depends what you're looking for in it, I suppose. But you'll get a great story and a great insight into it. If that interests you, then you'll enjoy it too.
Absolutely. So Ryan, just wrapping up here, how can an audience member get in touch with you? What's website? What's your social media platform of choice?
To get in contact with me, the social media of choice is Instagram, and please look for Ryan_Stramrood. I've got two. One's Ryan Stramrood at Ryan Stramrood, but Ryan_Stramrood is where I put all my swimming stuff and my challenges and what I'm up to next. So I do try and respond as best possible. I'm actually quite good like that. Sometimes I'm inundated, but please, I would urge you to get hold of me. I'd love to chat. My website is www.ryanstramrood.com. And I'm on Facebook and whatever else, but I'm not very good at social media. But Instagram's probably where I am the most.
Fantastic. And we'll include those in the show notes. We'll include your links to your book. Ryan, it's been awesome having you on the show. I could talk to you for
Fabulous.
hours and listen to your stories and the deep down learnings that you've delivered. Um, Clearly there's a benefit of us getting outside of our comfort zone and seeing what the other side of the line looks like. My message to my
Yeah.
audience, if you've got some value out of this conversation today, please share it with your community. Please share Ryan's message, grab his book, tell us what you think, like the episode, like the podcast. Ryan, it's been awesome having you on the show, and thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Greg. We didn't scratch the surface of what's really down there, but maybe we can do it again. I'd love to share more.
Fantastic. Absolutely. Thank you for tuning in to the Chief Endurance Officer Podcast. To hear more inspiring stories and strategies around the endurance mindset, be sure to subscribe below or visit us at chiefenduranceofficer.com. Until next time, keep pushing those limits